Good evening everyone, welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers update today, the 7th of January 2014. Today we're going to talk mostly about the upcoming Northern Territory low, then the monsoon trough that's associated with it, and we'll also briefly touch on the possible future low out in the Northern Coral Sea and what that might do. So today across Australia, thanks to this weather zone synoptic chart, we can see we've got a very large high here in the Bight, at about 1028 hectopascals. We also have a trough system coming through Queensland, creating a lot of shower and storm activity, and that trough system extending all the way through. Now, in behind that trough system is some very dry air, and what we've seen the last couple of days is that the Darwin area itself has actually broken a couple of records for January with temperatures in around the 36 degree mark. So we've got some very dry air pushing in behind that trough system above the surface, yet the surface is still very moist, and so we've got a situation there where it's very uncomfortable for Darwin residents. We've had heat wave conditions over the eastern half of the country as well. They're set to ease if they haven't eased already. We are getting this high. This high will eventually push in an easterly direction, so the high will push out here and it'll direct more fresh easterly winds into the Queensland, so Queensland's heat wave is pretty well over. It'll also direct a fair bit of shower and storm activity, a fair bit of moisture into the trough system, which will culminate in shower and storm activity through the west of the state. On the east coast, we're going to see an increase in rainfall as well. As this high pushes through, we're going to see some very moist winds pushing onto the coast here. And aided by a little bit of troughing at the in the mid-levels, we should see a fair amount of shower and possibly even some rain activity even in parts of the coast of Queensland over the next few days. Now, let's look at a little bit further ahead. Before we go into do that, once again ahead of myself, we do have a tropical low out here in the southeast Indian Ocean. Now that is being sheared away, and you can see its signature just being sheared constantly out here to the west, and that system will not further intensify in the Australian region. It may do so once it gets into the central Indian Ocean in the longer term, but it's not going to pose a threat to Christmas or possibly even Cocos Islands. Not going to pose a threat to any of those Australian territories there. Over the rest of the country, we're looking at fairly benign conditions for monsoonal conditions or pre-monsoonal conditions. That's all about to change in the next few days. There is still a lot of convection just here in the northeastern part of your screen, so the top right of your screen, in the Solomon Islands area, and there is a little bit firing up in the North Coral Sea as well. So what we actually have out here is a bit of a wave, a tropical wave called a Rossby wave. It's pushing westwards, and it will eventually spawn and spin off a tropical low somewhere in here in the northern Gulf of Carpentaria. That tropical low will drag the monsoon trough southwards, and as that tropical low is expected to then push in a southwest or westerly direction, the monsoon trough will be dipping southwards onto the Australian mainland and will create a hell of a lot of rain for the far northern parts of the Northern Territory and also the northern parts of the Kimberley as well. We're going to see some very heavy rainfall there in the 4 to 8 day period. We'll talk about rainfall shortly. Over the Queensland coast, we've already talked about it, so we're not going to talk about it again. Nothing cyclonic there for Queensland in the coming days. In the longer term, there are signs that the Coral Sea will start to become more active in terms of a tropical low possibly forming between PNG and the Solomons. We'll talk a bit more about that a little later on. But for now, and until probably our next update, which will be on Friday, not too much is going on in the tropics. But once we get into this weekend, that's all about to change. So looking at tomorrow's rainfall, we're going to start to see an increase in rainfall across Queensland in that trough system, and as that southeast surge pushes up the coast, we're going to see some pretty decent falls, particularly over the Capricornia coastline and possibly just south of that. Also looking at some fairly good rainfall over southern and central parts of Queensland in some fairly decent shower and storm activity there. Also seeing some convergent flow associated with that Rossby wave that we talked about up here in the far northern parts of Cape York Peninsula, and even just south of that in a northeast-southeast convergent flow across the more the central parts of the peninsula. As we head to Thursday, you're going to see more of that rainfall on the peninsula coastline extending south to about Cairns even. And then we're also going to see that surge continuing to push up the coast, possibly getting to as far north as Mackay on Thursday, and we're going to see some very good thunderstorm activity pushing inland here throughout the Queensland region. Further, the Northern Territory, we're going to start to see an increase in moisture over the northeastern half of the territory as well. Just the possibility of some isolated shower and storm activity on the western top end coast as well, not shown on that chart. On Friday, we're continuing to see very active conditions for the northern peninsula. We're going to see some good shower activity on the coastline as well, associated with that moist southeast to east flow, possibly pushing now as far as north as Bowen, and from about Ingham northwards on the Queensland coastline. Also on the West Peninsula, we're going to start to see an increase in rainfall as well, and that stuff over inland Queensland continues to be quite active, particularly over southwestern Queensland, but also extending further to the west out here in the Northern Territory, where we're going to start to see more, not general, but probably more enhancement of those isolated showers and storms that might start forming on Thursday, on Friday. And then things start to get interesting after that. So Saturday, you can see this Gulf country region now, the Gulf of Carpentaria, becoming very active. The North Tropical Coast becoming very active. You're looking there at possibility of falls of over 50 millimetres in 24 hours. So that region becomes very active Saturday as well in that moist flow. And further to the north, we get some convergence between the monsoon trough and the southeasterlies coming through. Now, because the high is going to be quite large and quite strong here over southeast and over the Tasman, it's going to hold the Queensland part of the monsoon trough back, and it's probably not going to get anywhere near as far south over Queensland as it will over the Northern Territory, at least in the short to medium term. Now, once again, it all depends on what happens with the low in the longer term as to whether Queensland gets more rain. But for now, our focus really becomes the Northern Territory, because after about Saturday, things fire up in that region. So over the next 4 days through to Saturday, once again, really good rainfall over inland Queensland. That will be a godsend for them. They will really be happy with that. Even places getting 10 mils or more would be happy with that, because they've had nothing. The central coast of Queensland going to see some enhancement of that shower activity, and then obviously the peninsula region going to see a lot of rain activity there over the next 4 days. Even the North Tropical Coast region possibly looking at 25 to 50, maybe even up to 100 millimetres in parts over the next 4 days, which will be fantastic news for them as well. They've been a very, very dry period they've had in December. The next 4 days, it gets amazingly hectic. Alright, the next 4 days we get that tropical low out here in the Gulf that develops, and at this stage most guidance pushes it northwards. Now at this stage most guidance keeps it very well to the north, and so the monsoon will only impinge to the coast and the hinterland regions of the Northern Territory, not so far inland. We're still going to get general shower and storm activity here, but the monsoonal activity, the really heavy stuff, remains very coastal over the Northern Territory. That system will continue pushing westwards and possibly in the longer term form into a TC, but we'll talk about that now once we finish with the rainfall. A little bit of shower and storm activity pushing through the inland regions, and the Queensland trough system starts to ease off now in favour of all this activity to the north. The North Tropical Coast remaining very active there, 50 to 100 mils expected in that next 4 day period as well. But really the focus of our attention has to be the Northern Territory for this tropical low forming and then deepening to a TC as it pushes westwards and possibly pops out here in the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf or just around the Timor Sea. So looking at the probability guidance over the next 2 days, particularly from day 1 to 2 in fact, we're going to see that tropical low that I mentioned here around Christmas Island continue pushing to the west. It does have a chance of forming, but maybe not just yet, maybe more in the 2 to 4 day period, and once it's probably out of the Australian longitudes. But it does have a chance of forming, don't get me wrong, and over the longer term a lot of the models do develop this system into a TC, knowing you're Australia. This is the area of interest here, around about the tip of Cape York through to the northeastern edge of the territory, and you just start to see 2% probabilities there of a TC forming in 1 to 2 days. Those probabilities will be enhanced and increase over the weekend. So the first model we take a look at here is the UK Met model for 5 days time. So this is now looking ahead to around the weekend, and what we actually have is this system in the UK Met model actually develops in the Arafura Sea and pushes to the west well north of the top end coastline. Now that seems to be a little bit too far to the north of this particular tropical low developing. In about day 4, it has it developing and pushing fairly rapidly out to the west up here, well north of the Northern Territory. Now we don't think it's going to happen quite that far north, but you just never know. Now, if this happens the way this particular model shows it, we're going to see most of the rainfall activity remaining offshore and not getting onto the coast. Here's a better look at that. We're seeing the system probably forming on the 11th, pushing in a fairly variable direction until the 12th, and then once the 12th happens, it starts to push in a west to southwest direction and starts to deepen. The blue colouring here suggesting the system will be down to about 1,000 hectopascals by the 13th of January as it pushes in a southwest direction. Now the GFS model is sort of struggling to pick up an actual dominant circulation here. This is for Sunday morning. It has a couple of different circulations, and the first is out here in the Arafura Sea, just like the UK Met model had it. There's a second minor circulation out here over the tip of the Cape and in the Torres Strait region. And let's have a look at how it deals with those two different circulations over the course of time. So that's Sunday morning. This is now Sunday night, what you're seeing here, and we can still see the two dominant circulations here and here. And then as we head towards Monday morning, we start to see that this circulation doesn't have much wind associated with it. This one starts to get a little windier, so we start to get a little bit more wind streaming into a central point, a little bit more vorticity at the surface. So by Monday night, you can see that that circulation is all washed out as part of the monsoon trough. This is now the dominant circulation. And as we head to Tuesday, we see that it really doesn't do anything until we sort of head into mid next week, and it's not until mid next week where the GFS model develops this into a decent system and a tropical cyclone that ends up hitting the southwestern Gulf. So that's a lot different to what we just saw in the UK Met model. So if we look at the latest European that we've got access to from earlier this morning that was run at 10 AM today, we can see that the monsoon trough here lies right along this area come Friday morning. Now on that Friday or Saturday, we're going to see that trough, particularly in this region here, ends up spinning up a low pressure system. So let's continue with this animation as we head towards later Friday and then into Saturday. You can see here by about Saturday night, we see similar to the UK Met model where we're starting to branch out into a fairly elongated low pressure system. You can see up here the monsoonal winds coming in from the northwest. You can see these winds coming in from the northeast, and you can see these winds coming in from the south or southwest into the center of the system. And so it's a fairly long system without a designated center, so it might take a little bit of time to get itself going. And if we continue the animation through to Sunday and see how it progresses on Sunday, you can see that it pushes just to the north of the top end coast. Now that's going to be close enough, folks, to dump a fair bit of rain over the region. We're starting to see near gale force winds here to the north coming in on the monsoon. So orange here is near gale force. A darker shade of orange is full on gales. And so we can see that those gales are starting, or those winds are really starting to ramp up on that system. The system is in the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf at that stage, just to the north of the North Kimberley coast. Now, if we head on the animation a bit longer, so if we look a little bit longer here onto the Wednesday forecast period, so this time, or just after this time next week, we get gale force or near gale force winds to the north of the system. The system lies just in here. Over the Kimberley coastline. Now, if it does that, we're going to see massive amounts of rainfall over the northwest parts of the country, and so that will be we're talking hundreds and hundreds of millimeters of rainfall if the system maintains this sort of trajectory just to the north of the top end, pushes into the Joseph Bonaparte, and then crosses and sort of remains right along the coastline. If it's a coastal hugger, you're going to see some massive rainfalls in here. It's not quite certain yet that it's going to be a coastal hugger. Some of the models push it more out in this way. Some of the models keep it more inland. But if it is a coastal hugger, we're going to see massive amounts of rainfall in this entire northwest coast, anywhere from even probably in the long term Port Hedland northwards. But this whole region is going to see massive amounts of rain over the next week to 10 days if this type of scenario happens and the system does become as what we call a bit of a coastal hugger. And as we head to Thursday, just to show you that that is the case in the longer term modelling, the system remains very close to the coastline, and you can see here gale force or near gale force winds from the north and fairly strong winds from the northeast as well. So we're going to see lots of rain in this area, folks, if this system pushes in the way it's expected. Let's go on to Queensland now. So this is the Queensland system, and what we see here, if we go to Sunday, is a trough, monsoon trough, located just in this area here, to the south of Honiara. As we progress the animation a little bit further towards Monday and Tuesday, we actually see by about Monday or even Tuesday morning, we do see a little bit of a low pressure system developing in this area to the south of Honiara, south of the Solomon Islands. Now that low doesn't actually have very favourable conditions to further develop as it pushes slowly westwards over the next 2 to 3 days after that. So by Wednesday we see that the low still lies in this area, pushed it in a little bit more in a southerly direction there, but it's still fairly elongated. There's no real circulation centre of that system. But as we head towards Thursday, we're going to see that the low actually washes out into more of a trough. So you can see here, that's where the low is now. It's definitely started to push westwards by Thursday, and it's more of a trough system as opposed to a low. And that's the key here. It's not going to have very favourable conditions for further intensification or development, and so therefore at that time, the models are predicting it to only be a trough system. Now, bearing in mind, of course, that those things can change very quickly. And the other thing you need to bear in mind is whether it's a trough system or a TC or low, it's going to create a lot of rainfall in the northern Queensland, far northern Queensland region. So you can see here, as it further pushes to the west, as that system approaches the Queensland coast, and if it approaches the Queensland coast, we're going to see a lot of rain, assuming that it continues on its westerly trajectory. We're going to see a lot of rain anywhere from probably Bowen, maybe even Mackay northwards, if that system can do what this model's predicting. Now, I'll show you the GFS model projection, because it has this same trough system pushing in a much more southerly location. So looking at the GFS model at around about the same time, you can still see the same type of trough system here, but it's really progressing that trough system much further to the south. No recognised low pressure system in there, but overall the trough then continues to push in a westerly direction as we head towards early to mid the week of the 21st, 22nd. And you can see here it really is just a trough system at this stage, not a designated or recognised low pressure region. Now, bearing in mind, of course, that as these systems are in the Coral Sea, the conditions, it only takes 24 to 48 hours of favourable conditions for them to intensify. So just be aware of that. This stage, as I say, model guidance predicting a trophy type low and pushing in a westerly direction towards the Queensland coast. That can all change. The real focus of activity is obviously the Northern Territory and Western Australia, because that is where some serious rainfall is going to happen. But this secondary area is possibly going to fire. It's still unclear because it's so far away. So don't stress if you're in Queensland. I know we have a lot of stress heads in Queensland, and I know it's understandable, but please don't stress because at this stage model guidance is not predicting anything overly strong in this area, and as I say, more of a trophy type low than a cyclone. But we do need to watch this area, because any type of trough in this Coral Sea region, it doesn't take too much to fire it up. So you can see, looking at the GFS ensemble guidance, we can see that there's potential for that tropical lower cyclone to be located on that Pilbara coastline, or near that Pilbara coastline, on the Tuesday the 21st. Now, as I say, if it gets off the coast, it definitely does have potential to be a cyclone. If it stays on the coast, it's going to be a massive rain producer for this region. Also over Queensland, interesting to note that by that stage we're either expecting that trophy type low or a weak low to have hit the central Queensland coast, or remain remaining in the southern Coral Sea, so it's a bit of a hit and miss affair. We're still not sure. The models are chopping and changing between what they want to do with that Queensland system in the long term, but really, as I say, the focus of activity needs to be, and the focus of our talks need to be, this region here, because this region here is going to see a real enhancement of rainfall, possibly even a TC in the next week to 10 days. Secondary area, obviously, after that stage is the Queensland region. Thanks very much for watching tonight, folks. As I say, things are going to get interesting, so by about Friday, when we update on Friday, probably from then on we'll be updating nightly, depending on what happens, obviously, with that Gulf low, because that really does need to be watched for further development. Thanks for watching today, and we'll talk to you again Friday.